John McMullen, Football at 4, at JF McMullen on Twitter. The skinny from today is Deshaun Jackson out for the game. That has already been announced. He has not announced Goddard and Jeffrey yet, but we'll get an update from John in just a minute. Isaac Seumalo, will he be replaced? We'll get into that as well. Plus Miles Sanders. What did Doug Peterson have to say about what he has seen from his running back as we bring in John McMullen here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John, we know that Deshaun Jackson is now out, which, you know, the interesting thought, like, I think a lot of people went into the week thinking that maybe Jeffrey was the guy that had less of a chance to play, but I guess Jeffrey is still a possibility, and Goddard did practice today. Is that accurate?
In a limited fashion. It's interesting because Dallas was out there with his helmets during the very, very small portion of practice open to us, which on Fridays is just stretching, essentially. But Alshon was not out there. So it's kind of surprising they even listed him as questionable. I can't imagine he would play, especially in the short week after, in the fact you have a game right behind it on Thursday, and there's soft tissue injuries and the possibility of aggravating it. So I think there might be a little bit of a competitive advantage card the Eagles are trying to play there, but I think there's at least a slight chance you might see Dallas Goedert, but I don't think Alshon's going to play.
Yeah, we were trying to figure this out, John, whether this is kind of a desperation move. Because if Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson were healthy and playing, do you think Dallas Goedert would be playing on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, probably not. And that's sort of how you have to shuffle an NFL roster. I mean, sometimes there's guys closer than other guys, and sometimes there's injuries that you will hold somebody back if you feel comfortable with something else. So I think all of that plays into it. And the best case scenario is maybe the Eagles decide to play none of them. I still think there's a legitimate opportunity that both Alshon and Dallas don't play. And they might go about it that way and try to get through it because it's a home game. They've been so dominant at home, and I think they can handle Detroit probably without both of them.
Yeah, I guess my worry would be because it's an aggravated calf injury that he already had, and it's a soft tissue injury, which has really been, it's dogged the Eagles for about 2 years now. That it surprises me that they would even. And listen, I get it; they got to win a game, but it surprises me they might risk losing a guy for a longer term period because they need some snaps out of him.
Well, and I don't think they necessarily do. He could be in that same category. I mean, I'm pretty confident Alshon's not going to play, but they're claiming there's at least a chance. I think Dallas could be in that same category. We know how these teams are. Even though it's not going to affect Matt Patricia whatsoever, he's going to prepare like they're going to be there anyway. That's the way these teams go about it, and it's kind of weird at times, I will freely admit, but I think they're going to err on the side of caution, mainly because, as I said, the bigger issue is not Sunday, it's Thursday. And the fact that not only do you have the short week in the Thursday night game, but you're also going on the road. So ultimately, I think they're going to play it cautious, but
yeah,
they've surprised us before, that's for sure.
Now, John, how is the offense different from what we saw kind of hodgepodge together the other night, where it's like this guy, we didn't plan for him getting hurt, we didn't plan for him getting hurt, you're out there. Now that these guys may know their roles, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Nelson Agholor, I don't know who the third guy might be, but how do you see the kind of setup for the wide receivers now that they probably have a better indication of what their roles are?
Well, and Mac Hollins would be the third guy if nobody plays. But the good part is they're game planning with those guys in mind. So they're not playing the entire week on the scout team. They're not mimicking Kenny Galladay last week. They were mimicking Julio Jones. They weren't involved in the game plan process in a significant manner. This week they are. So you get to prepare, and that's why you never like not having good players, but it's easier when you know they're not going to be there. What the worst case scenario in Atlanta, the problem was they thought they were going to have all these players. So not only did they game plan, they also took up 46-man roster spots. So all of that kind of throws everything into disarray really, really early in the game, and it was a difficult environment. And I think part of the reason they got off such a slow start, but we talked about that yesterday. They kind of get off the slow starts anyway. So I'm not sure how much that contributed, but it certainly hurt them. I think it's fair to say, and they needed a couple quarters to get their feet under them, and then they started to fight and claw and got back in the game.
How important is this game, John, for Nelson Agholor? And is it not important at all? Is it essential? You have some people saying big drop in Atlanta, although he did bounce back and make a big catch to move the chains there in the same game. But with all these weapons that are going to be out for the Philadelphia Eagles, is this an important game for Nelson Agholor that maybe he can win this game for the Eagles? Or is it the new guys that are lining up alongside him, the Arcega-Whitesides of the world and the Mac Hollins of the world?
No, I think it's huge, not only for Nelson and a team aspect, but also from a personal standpoint, because he is on a contract year. He is fighting for that second contract. It's probably going to be elsewhere, to be honest, not here, although you never know how things shake out. And he's going to have an opportunity, like he did last week, to be the number one wide receiver, most likely, unless Alshon does play. So he's going to be the top guy. And you mentioned, look, everybody drops passes in this league at some point, but he's dropped more than his share, and that's the problem. And that has always been the problem, the consistency, catching the football. Can he make big plays? Yes. As you pointed out, he got back, shook it off, made a big play. But the great receivers in this league, they're consistent, and they're consistent when they're catching the football. Nelson has not been, and I think it's fair to say that. It's fair to point it out. So every time he gets this type of opportunity, remember, this is a former number one first-round pick, and he's a third receiver typically. He was drafted with the assumption at some point he would become a number one receiver, or at least a very, very good number two receiver. Hasn't reached that goal yet, so it's always important for him to produce.
Amen, John, because these guys think I'm too harsh on Agholor.
No, that's not the case at all.
Well, I was a little harsh on Monday, but you guys are surprised.
I think he deserves a lot of criticism. I'm just saying the reason that he deserves the criticism is mainly because what John said. I think we realize he's been a disappointment.
Right, you've lowered your expectations.
Yeah, right. I don't view him any longer as that first-round pick that should have been a number one receiver.
He means nothing to us. That's the difference.
I view him of what he is. He's a number three guy now. And he got rocked in the end zone, and guess what? I expected to drop that ball because he's not a number one.
Well, yeah, we have learned that. John, speaking of numbers with receivers, are they really going to go into this game on Sunday with three wide receivers, Agholor, Mac Hollins, and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, with Darren Sproles being a fourth, or are they going to make a move to bring up Greg Ward here?
Yeah, well, we're going to know pretty quickly because they have to do it by tomorrow. Obviously, you don't have to Greg is practicing anyway, so they can wait till the last minute. And I think, they're not going to go into the game with just three receivers. So I think if Alshon isn't going to play, then they're going to activate Greg Ward, and that's going to be a clear indication because you do need bodies at those particular positions. So it kind of depends on whether or not Alshon really does have a chance and how far they're going to push this competitive advantage card. And
can they wait? Because Alshon could test it on game day and aggravate it or not like it, and then if you haven't already brought Ward back, Ward onto the 53-man, like you said, by 4 o'clock tomorrow, then it seems to me like don't even take that risk. Yeah.
There is a big gamble because that's just what happened to him with more Goddard in pregame, and those guys got hurt early in the game. But
right.
Nonetheless, yeah, you're obviously, if he's on the game day 46 and you're going to let him test it out, it's, you can wait 90 minutes before the game, and that's fine. But as you say, you can't make transactions in this league on Sunday. So you have to make the decision on Greg Ward the day before. So it's kind of, you are taking a chance if you're not bringing him up. There's no question about that.
John McMullen with us, Football at 4. I want to ask you a little bit about this matchup. We talked to Michael Rothstein earlier. The last couple of weeks, we thought that the Eagles had a matchup to exploit up front. Donald Penn, Eric Flowers, we thought, hey, there's a spot right there. Last week, Lindstrom was out. That was a spot. How is this Detroit offensive line? Because we felt the last 2 weeks they've faced pretty average to weaker offensive lines, and there's been questions about the pressure. How about this week?
It's an average offensive line, I would say. It's certainly not a top 10 offensive line. It's also not one of the worst offensive line. They spent big assets on the tackle position, as some people do. They brought Ricky Wagner, right tackle, over from Baltimore. First-round pick at left tackle, and Decker, but he's not really lived up to the building. And Ragnow at center is also a high-level draft choice, and I think they still have really high hopes for him. Guards not as certainly physically gifted as those guys are, but it's a decent group, and it's probably the best offensive line the Eagles have faced so far in this young season, but that's, as you point out, that's probably not saying much.
Yeah, John, and also – what has your take been on the Eagles' pressure the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a big thing. It's not been bad. It's still more than certainly most teams in this league. It's way above average, but they haven't gotten sacks, and everybody's obsessed with that one number. And I use Derek Barnett as an example because he's second in the league in quarterback pressures right now. And the guy who's ahead of him is Myles Garrett, but he's got 5 sacks, and Derek hasn't gotten a sack. So Jim preaches discipline on the pass rush. He does not like freelancing. That always hurts sacks numbers, but good defensive coordinators who get their guys to be disciplined on the pass rush tend to have good defenses. So for people looking for 15 sacks and 20 sacks, you're probably not going to get that with this defense. But what you are going to get is sound football, sound pass rush, and maybe it results in something else, whether it's just speeding the quarterback up, getting him off his spots, all those types of things, or even last week, interceptions against Matt Ryan. So there are good things that can happen if you get pressure on the quarterback and you don't get a sack. And, hey,
sure.
I always say the biggest play leading up to the Super Bowl was exactly that. If you go back to Chris Long and the NFC Championship game, well, if he sacks Case Keenum, guess what? Maybe the Vikings punt the football. It keeps going the way it was. The Vikings were leading. Maybe they stop. Totally different. They changed the whole face of the game. And, hey, people want sacks. I don't understand. That's like one of those statistics, like wins for pitchers in baseball. Everybody's obsessed.
Well, this came
with
up
it.
based on we were talking about the Eagles secondary and how it matches up with this wide receiving core. And, I said, look, the Eagles their secondary, regardless of how they match up, they're the kind of secondary that lets you catch the ball in front of them. And a lot of it is, if they get pressure, they make them look better. Like they got beat over the top last time because they blitzed a couple times. But the secondary of the Eagles, a lot of times, they're not going to match up great against guys. They're going to seem anyway because they're going to let you catch the ball. They let you catch the ball in front of you. It's whether or not they're going to tackle or not. But the pressure kind of sometimes gets tied to that.
Well, pressure's always tied to pass coverage and vice versa for every team in this league. And if you do have good corners, if you do have a Jalen Ramsey, you can probably afford to have less of the pass rush at times. If you have corners that can't hold up, you better get a pass rush. So it's always hand in hand for everyone. The key is, again, if you're asking me who's better, the Eagles pass rush or the Eagles secondary, it's the Eagles pass rush. And it's not close, even now. Even though they aren't putting up the numbers that people want to see. And certainly in the first 2 weeks of the season, I think the cornerbacks have not been good for the most part, although I think Sidney Jones played pretty well in Atlanta. Part of the reason when Jim does blitz, it's a lot of zero blitz, is because he knows if he's blitzing, he's got to get there. That enters it into it as well. And then the philosophy of how much they play the Falcons, and he was trying to give Matt Ryan, who's a veteran quarterback who's seen it all, trying to give him a different look, trying to give him a curveball. So if people think that's going to be the same thing every week, it's not. But there's this weird narrative in Philadelphia that Jim Schwartz never changes. I'm like, he's one of the most malleable defensive coordinators I've ever seen. And I don't get why people think he only does one thing. It's one of those things, and I could put a laundry list of things he's done. Even last week, very limited snaps. Did anyone have Josh Sweat getting interior reps as a defensive tackle? I didn't see that coming. If you go back to last year when all the safety injuries were piling up, did anybody have Avonte Maddox going back to play free safety? I mean, this guy thinks out of the box. I was talking to people about he doesn't travel corners. So if he gets Jalen Ramsey, he's not going to travel corners. He has traveled corners in the past. When he's had corners, he can do it. And Stephen Gilmore would be one. Cortland Finnegan back in the day would be another that have traveled with Jim Schwartz. And when he was in Detroit, real quick, guys, they had a corner by the name of Chris Houston. I've never heard of this before. He was struggling, so Jim had him travel when they were playing Des Bryant and the Cowboys, but to the opposite receiver, because he didn't want him to lose more confidence. This guy does more than any defensive coordinator not named Bill Belichick in football. Anybody. There's not a guy who does more different things than Jim Schwartz. It is a weird narrative to me.
Is there something strange about everything you just said about Jim? And the one thing, and this not, I don't get this from fans, it's from talking to other coaches and people around the league, John, is that when they look at Jim, the one thing they'll say is, when he does blitz, you know which blitz it's going to run, because as you mentioned before, it's either the zero blitz or he's got two or three. He doesn't disguise a lot. He doesn't use deception. He's a very simple blitzer. It's almost a strange reconciliation that you have to make, that he can be so outside the box and everything else. But with these things here, he's a little bit more by the book in that regard.
Well, I think from a blitz standpoint, his philosophy is he doesn't want to blitz. There's no question about that. His core philosophy, and every coach has a core philosophy, is to get home with 4 if you can. And he does want to simplify the scheme so the players play fast. So we've heard that, cover 3 coordinators say that all the time. That's the goal, to not have players thinking but reacting and play quickly. So at times, I think it's more of the preparation where the innovative stuff comes in. When they get on the field, he wants to simplify things as quickly as possible. But again, I didn't even mention the biggest one of all. I don't know another player in this league that played all 7 positions on the back end. Malcolm Jenkins did that last year. So it is, maybe it's tough to add those 2 things together. But as far as trying different things, as far as going outside of the box, as far as trying to accentuate the talent you have on hand, I mean, this guy will try everything. And I think you've seen that over the past couple years, but for whatever reason, a lot of people just don't believe it. And I got to be honest, I don't understand it.
John, what did Doug Peterson tell you today about his rookie running back, Miles Sanders? And do you anticipate more of Sanders or more of Howard this week?
Well, I anticipate more Jordan Howard. I think part of the reason why was they were disappointed with Miles' performance in Atlanta. So behind the scenes, there's a couple things that tend me to lean to think you're going to see more Jordan Howard, but we'll see. They tend to be stubborn with those types of things. But it's rare. I mean, Mike Rose said it earlier in the week, and I asked Doug about it today. He freely admitted, look, he's got to put his foot in the ground and go. He's dancing. He's trying to hit the home run instead of taking the 4 or 5 yards that are there. A couple times that resulted in holding penalties, which are up all over the league. So it hasn't worked out, at least early in the season. And I think the Eagles are at that point where they're going to see if the veteran, who isn't nearly as explosive, can just go in and settle things down and take that 4 yards if it's there, that 3 yards, and go about it that way. But we'll see. I think that's the way it's going to go. And I think they're going to ease up a little bit on Miles and understand that what I said, if they were skipping steps maybe and they were expecting a little bit too much out of him to hit the ground running. Not to say he won't be a very good player at some point, but it's kind of strange that he's ahead of a veteran guy who's kind of proven himself because he hasn't played well, to be honest.
John McMullen at JF McMullen, and of course you can hear him during all the Countdown to Kickoff shows and every day here at 4 o'clock, Football at 4. By the way, breaking news as we're talking to John, the Patriots have released Antonio Brown. So he has played 1 game with the Patriots. And, John, I'll quickly ask you before we get your pick, will we ever see Antonio Brown suit up for another team?
I think we will. I think Andrew Brandt is the one who says it. I mean, talent gets the longer leash, and he's talented. So I think at some point there will be another team that will give him an opportunity because when he's on the field, he obviously produces. But he's been off the rails now and going.
Sounds like a Raider. Maybe the Raiders.
Yeah,
take
right.
a chance on a guy like that.
They're the other team that
these Cowboys.
The Cowboys, but we'll
they're
see.
next.
Last one. Last night, did we see Jalen Ramsey in Jacksonville for the last time, or does that win in that division? Do they maybe try to reconcile?
Well, it's interesting because Shad Khan, who is the owner of the Jaguars, spoke before that game, and it was kind of like it was almost a veiled, like, this is it. We're done. We're done with this guy. And then today, it's the exact opposite. They're talking about an extension. It's almost like they watched the game and they said, oh, this guy's pretty good. And I haven't noticed
that's weird.
that.
He had one of his worst games.
Yeah. It's strange what's going on down there. And, look, I think anytime, and we just talked about Antonio, anytime you're getting into a fight with the general manager or coach, you got to move on from that particular player. I think that's where we were early in this process, and now the Jaguars might be rethinking. And maybe it's because, we talk about the value of this particular player. How are you going to get value in return? If a team's going to give you a 1, 2 1s, a 1, a 2, a player, maybe some late round picks. I mean, there is a lot that would have to come back. And some teams are balking at that asking price. So maybe they're saying, this guy, we can't just give this guy away. So I don't think it's – yesterday I thought he was gone. Yesterday I thought he was gone. Today I think it's more in the 60-40 range. I think it's trending in the opposite direction.
Wow. By the way, happy hour at the Barefoot Beach Bar, John. You need to be here. I mean, we got this place is fantastic right now. This is the best weather I've ever had. We're outside. We are sitting at the pool, by the way. We can put our feet in the water, and we got the live music at the bar within an arm's reach. Where are you?
Well, I'm in my house, just back from the NovaCare complex. But, yeah, I mean, this is the perfect time of the year for down there at Cape May, the shore in general, because you don't have the crazy crowds. The weather is just as nice, and I think it's going to be 89 over the weekend. So you guys are going to get some more good beach days.
All right, John McMullen's pick for Eagles-Lions is?
I think the Eagles are going to win the game. The Lions are one of those teams that are kind of good, but they're not good enough, and they certainly haven't learned to win on the road in this league in a tough environment. So even with all the issues they have, I think the Eagles are going to win, probably a little bit more difficult than it would be under typical circumstances, probably about a 23-17 game.
23-17, Johnny Mack. Listen to him all weekend long with coverage of Eagles and Lions right here on 97.3 ESPN and the Countdown to Kickoff show with Tony Bruno. Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, live at Toll Man Joe's. All right, man, we'll talk to you Monday.
All right, thank you, guys.